is responsive reading number 322. 322. It's about joy. Oh, come, let us sing it to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation.
Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving, and make a joyful noise unto him with songs.
Be glad in the Lord and rejoice, ye righteous, and shout for joy, all ye that are upright in heart.
Because thou hast been my help, therefore in the shadow of thy wings will I rejoice.
The Lord hath done great things for us, whereof we are glad.
Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth.
Your joy no man taketh from you.
We glory in tribulations also, because the love of God is shed abroad in our hearts by the Holy Ghost which is given to us.
Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say, rejoice.
Arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee.
And the scripture we're going to read today is Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. And y'all will recognize this. As you flip there, y'all recognize this. This is the beginning to the Sermon on the Mount, which is Jesus' longest sermon. And it's a familiar passage in this. But what I think is really cool about it is spoken to the disciples. Jesus spoke this introduction to the disciples who were around the area. And so he's talking to us. He was talking to Christians. This was the next step after you were saved. When you were a disciple, this is what you try to do. And it's a popular sermon. As I was telling Icy and Carl before we started, it's a sermon that's had books written about it. When I was preparing, I talked to Jerry Page, who kind of helped me prepare for these sermons. And he gave me a whole book. It had 200 pages dedicated to these 11 verses. And one thing that the scholars talk about when they look at this scripture is, when you read it, is blessed be the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn. And blessed be actually goes to the Greek word makarios. And excuse me, I'm using my iPad as a Bible, so that's why I'm playing with something up here. It translates into... Blessed be, it translates from the Greek word makarios. And that word is actually, it actually doesn't translate exactly to blessed be. Scholars kind of debate a lot about what it actually means. But one phrase that I like a lot, and that the scholar that I was reading about liked a lot, was actually, it translates to the Greek phrase, those whose lives are white. Makarios was actually used as like a recommendation as how you should live. Or congratulations if you are living that way. So Jesus was really recommending that we live our lives this way. So now that I have it pulled up on my iPad, let's go ahead and read. We're going to read Matthew chapter 5. And I'm going to start at verse 1 and go to verse 11. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them. He said, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And as I was talking about, when Jesus said blessed be, it was really a recommendation as to we should have these traits when we live our lives as Christians, because he was talking to Christians. And the first thing Jesus said was really, blessed are the poor in spirit. And it wasn't talking about those people who are weak in spirit, who have weak faith. That's not what he was talking about. Poor in spirit is actually a reference to the Old Testament. And it was a reference to the Israelites who were so oppressed that they had to depend on God. That was all they had. A modern day reference, I was actually talking to the missionaries. We had a big missions conference. So we had people in from Peru. We had missionaries that were in Kentucky, the 4 parts of Kentucky. And we had missionaries from all over. But the way they described it was that in America, if we have a headache, we go get Advil. If we have heartburn, we go get Tums. If we're sick, we just go to the doctor. But in Haiti, or in Peru, or in Costa Rica, in the poor villages, they don't have Advil. They can't afford it. They can't afford Tums. And there aren't really any trained doctors in those areas. So instead, they pray. They pray for God for healing. It's really cool that we had that praise for Carl, because that's what happens with them. That's the way they get healed. They get healed by miracles like the ones that happen to Carl's legs. They get healed. There's all kinds of stories down there about how people get healed. So that's what Jesus was talking about, the poor in spirit. He was talking about the people who are desperate for God. He was talking about the people who depend on God. And he was saying they're doing well. He was saying, blessed are those. He was saying I recommend that you live this way. The second thing that Jesus says is, blessed are those who mourn. And I had trouble with this because later on in the scripture, it says, be joyful, basically. So when I was reading this, I had a little bit of trouble. But as me and Jerry were talking, we kind of came to the conclusion that there are things we should mourn. We should mourn that there's still some slavery in the world. We should mourn that not everybody's going to be saved. We should mourn these things. We should. But the key part of this is that what's after. It says, for they will be comforted. We should embrace the comfort that God offers, because he does comfort us. And he does give us peace. The third thing that Jesus says are, blessed are the meek. And when Jesus was talking about the meek, he wasn't necessarily talking about people who don't really stick up for themselves or kind of get pushed around. That's not what he was talking about. The word Jesus used for meek was also used at that time to describe a war horse who was so powerful, who was so mighty. But this war horse was so mighty and was so powerful, but the word meek was used to describe the saddle-broken war horses who had all this power and who had all this might, but they were under the control of one master or one rider. We have all this power to do both good, to do either good or evil in every decision that we make. We have a lot of power as human beings. But Jesus was saying that we should be under the control of one master. We should be under the control of one God. And that's kind of what he was talking about, is those who are powerful, but they do God's will. They're meek. The fourth thing Jesus says is, blessed are those who thirst for righteousness. And the people who thirst for righteousness, the way I kind of envision it, is those who strive to do God's will in all their lives. If you're an athlete, because I used to be an athlete, I played baseball. And when you were training to go to the state championship, or maybe you were training to go to the World Series, or maybe you were training to run a race, or maybe you go to the Super Bowl, you train with this one mindedness. That's what you do. You work and you work and you work until you get to the Super Bowl, or until you get to the World Series. That's the same way we should train to be righteous. That's the same way we should thirst for righteousness. We should continue to work, continue to strive. As Paul talked about it, we should continue to run the race so that we can get to the finish. And we should continue to strive and be that single-mindedness to thirst for righteousness. Jesus said, blessed are the merciful. And the merciful aren't just those who forgive after a while. They're the people who are slow to anger, who don't really try to take revenge, and who really see both sides. Before they make any judgment, they try to see both sides. Even after they do see both sides, even if they see that they were wrong, they try to offer forgiveness. They don't really hold grudges because they're merciful, just as Jesus was merciful to us. Being merciful is a lot harder than it sounds. The sixth thing Jesus said is, blessed are the pure in heart. And pure in heart kind of goes along with the thirst for righteousness. And the fact that you go with this one-mindedness to be with God, to be in God's presence. When Moses would lead the Israelites around the desert, when he would be in the presence of God, whether in the tabernacle or whether on Mount Sinai, he would come out with this great radiant face. And after a while, he had to put a turban around his face whenever he came out of the temple, because his face would shine so bright that people couldn't look at him. And that's what you say. Jesus was saying that we should be pure in heart, that we should strive to be in God's presence. In verse 7, Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. And these are people who actively pursue peace. It kind of brings the example that Paul had when he said when one Christian is going to the store, going to the courthouse, rather, with another Christian, that they should try to make peace before they ever get there. That way they don't let the unbelievers see strife. That's the same way we should seek peace in all situations, actively seek peace. That's what Jesus was talking about. Then in verse 8 it says, blessed are those who are persecuted. And in order to be persecuted, we have to be unashamed. Otherwise, we would have nothing to be persecuted for. Because if people don't know about our faith, then they can't persecute us for our faith. So Jesus is saying, blessed are those who are persecuted because of their righteousness. Because they're unashamed, because they're doing something right. If you're unashamed, you're sharing the gospel, then you're doing something right. It's a good thing. And Jesus knew that we'd be persecuted. In verse 11, he said, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Jesus knew we'd be persecuted. If we took on these traits, if we were poor in spirit, if we mourned, if we were meek, if we thirsted for righteousness and pure in heart, if we were merciful peacemakers, and we were unashamed, he knew that we'd be persecuted. And there are two ways to respond to this persecution. And that's why I really like this message, is because up to this point, I had kind of lived by the motto of life is not something to be endured, or life is not something to be enjoyed, rather, but something to be endured. That's kind of how, when I was facing struggles, that's kind of what I lived by, and I was wrong. I was wrong. And as I was reading this verse, and as some things happened over the last couple of weeks, I realized I was wrong. Because in verse 12, Jesus says, rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecute the prophets who were before you. Jesus told us to rejoice, and Jesus told us to be happy. When we are faced with struggle, when we are persecuted, Jesus told us to be happy. So the question comes, why be happy? Why be happy when people hurt us for our faith? When we're hurting? And there's really two reasons. The first reason is all the promises. Just as there are 8 things that we should be doing in our lives as Christians, there are 8 promises. Jesus said that the poor in spirit, they will receive the kingdom of heaven. They will inherit